Utica College professor Luke Perry, who joins us on the phone. We're going to talk about the latest in New York's new voting laws. But first, Professor Perry, I want to talk about where we are right now with this government shutdown. Some news over the weekend. It appears the deal has fallen apart. What are you seeing as you watch this unfold?
Yes, it doesn't look good. Both sides in the conference committee were hoping to reach an agreement yesterday so that the House and the Senate could get the legislation passed in time and it could be signed by the president by the end of the week. That didn't happen, so now negotiations are going to continue. It looks less likely, obviously, that they're going to reach an agreement on border security. So what I think might happen now is that barring something remarkable and they do reach an agreement, they'll probably agree on a continuing resolution to fund the government for X number of additional weeks to give some more time to avoid a shutdown. But the shutdown is certainly a possibility.
So you think it's possible, even if they don't have a deal, that there won't be a shutdown on Friday?
I do, because I think particularly congressional leaders and members of Congress have no interest in another shutdown.
Right.
And I think they're going to do whatever they can to avoid that. They won't agree to that option, I wouldn't think, until the 11th hour, and they've exhausted all other options. And it's, of course, no certainty that's going to happen. It's very hard to predict these situations. There's so much in flux, and a lot of it's pretty unorthodox. But I think it's more likely than not that Leader McConnell and his Democratic counterparts are not going to want to go down the road of shutdown again, because it cost the economy $11 billion. It was damaging politically. It's just something that they're going to really try to avoid, and I think they'll do so even if they don't reach a border agreement.
Would President Trump would agree to that, though?
Well, that's the interesting thing in terms of how this unfolds. I think that McConnell has been outspoken that he does not want to shut down. He's going to do everything he can to avoid it. So the rubber meets the road, perhaps, with him and working with Democrats and coming up with something, and then putting the ball in President Trump's court and saying, all right, if you're going to shut the government down, we've absolved ourselves from this because we reached an agreement. So, the president would have to veto it, and then it would be back to Congress to see if they override the veto.
Yeah, it would absolutely, if it went to shutdown at that point, it would be a Trump shutdown. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It would be that he wouldn't accept. So the other option is whatever they type of an agreement they come to, this idea of declaring a national emergency and then just finding the funding for the wall anyway. I'm surprised that it seems to me, and I could be wrong, that Democrats maybe last minute upped their request for things that they wanted in this agreement, and that's kind of what derailed it. Do you think I'm close on that?
I think the challenge is in the details, right? So both sides want to resolve this, and they both have policy priorities that they're trying to pursue. And now, when you're at that very last point to iron everything out, it's not uncommon for things to become sticking points. And really, we're talking about 16,000 beds that ICE has to detain undocumented immigrants. And the Republicans wanted there to be an exemption that there can be more beds for undocumented people who have a criminal record, and the Democrats wanted that cap of beds to be in place to prompt the federal government to focus only on undocumented people who have criminal records. So that's really in the weeds in terms of trying to iron this out, and that's where the impasse, it appears, emerged at this point.
Right, the number of beds. And I saw a report actually at the end of last week that they wanted to go from 40,000 beds. The Democrats were proposing 40,000 beds down to 35,000. The report I saw yesterday, though, was 40,000 beds down to 16,000, which is a dramatic jump, I guess, from their original position, at least based on what I was reading this weekend.
And just to be clear, too, I mean, we're talking about, so you had mentioned that if the president vetoes, I mean, what he would be vetoing is the continuing resolution to continue negotiation talks, not necessarily whatever deal that they come to. I mean, there's the possibility that they don't even come to a deal and they have to fund the government a little bit longer to extend the negotiations. Trump would probably veto that just because he said, no, I gave you 3 weeks and that's it.
Right. So,
all this obviously is in flux. It would remain to be seen. I think it would be very difficult if the Congress agrees to a spending deal, a short term, let's get another 2 weeks or something like that, I think it'd be hard for the president to veto that. That would be very damaging politically. But he might. I mean, he said that he would. So, and to your previous point, Jeff, in terms of the beds between 40,000 and 16,000, that seems like a big amount. But when we talk about the number of undocumented people in the country, I mean, we're talking about 10 million. So it's relatively, even though that's a big amount when you look at it in isolation, and you talk about the scope of undocumented people in the U.S., it's much, much larger than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. We've only got a couple minutes left. I did want to get into the consolidation of the primary in New York and the early voting. Just some thoughts from you on early voting and what this means in New York State, and does that apply to primaries as well?
I think it's good for New York State. I mean, New York was one of the dozen states that did not have early voting. We've seen this become an emphasis throughout the country, particularly over the last several years. And the problem is this. American democracy does a very poor job in terms of people turning out to vote. And some of that is on citizens to become more active and engaged, and some of that is the way the system works. Unlike most other democracies, it's on Americans to register to vote. We've got federalism, so it's 50 different state systems with all these different registration dates and voting dates and all these types of things. So it's really not particularly easy to vote in the United States. So anything that states can do to create more time and to make things easier and more efficient, I think is good for democracy, because our turnout in federal elections on a good cycle is about 50% of eligible adults. And that's really, 10, 20, 30% below where most Western democracies are.
All right. Luke Perry, professor at Utica College. I wanted to get more into this conversation. Maybe we can reschedule you for later this week. But thanks for coming on to join us in a unique perspective, because most of what I saw yesterday all said, without a deal yesterday or sometime early today, the government was headed for a shutdown, hands down. But you bring up an interesting possibility that maybe they can reach a very short-term deal, extend the deadline, and then if it came to it, possibly override President Trump. So Utica College professor Luke Perry, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.